The moment I pulled out that unmarked envelope from the pile of mail, a chill ran down my spine. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in an unfamiliar handwriting. My instincts told me to ignore it, to toss it aside like any other piece of junk mail, but something compelled me to slip a finger under the flap and tear it open. "Your husband is lying to you." Those 5 words hit me like a freight train. My heart pounded as I unfolded the letter with shaking hands. More accusations leapt off the page. Details about Dexter's supposed infidelity, claims about secret meetings and hotel rendezvous. "Wake up, Renata. The truth is closer than you think." I wanted to believe this was all some cruel prank. But then my eyes landed on the phone, tucked into the envelope, a blurry image of Dexter embracing another woman. My mind whirled as I studied every pixel, desperately looking for an explanation, something to disprove what I was seeing. "Oh my God, what is this?" Dexter's voice made me jump. I spun around, the letter crinkling in my tightened grip. He had just walked through the front door after another late night at his tech startup. His eyes widened when he saw what was in my hands. "It's nothing, just some stupid joke mail," I lied, my voice trembling. He reached for the letter, but I pulled it away protectively. "Let me see." "I said it's nothing," I snapped. A dozen emotions battled within me: shock, disbelief, anger, but mostly a nagging fear that there may be some truth behind these horrific accusations. Dexter's brow furrowed with concern. "Renata, you know I would never cheat on you. After everything we've been through together, how could you even think that?" My mind rewound to the struggles we'd endured over the years, the miscarriages, the financial hardships, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, questioning if we'd ever catch a break. Through it all, Dexter had been my rock, my shelter against the cruel world. "You're right," I whispered, forcing a nod. I'm overreacting." He pulled me into a reassuring embrace, his familiar warmth providing a momentary blanket of comfort. But I couldn't shake the feeling that things had somehow shifted between us. As I hugged him back, something felt off. That night, long after Dexter had fallen asleep, I stared at the crinkled letter and grainy photo on my nightstand. My husband, my loving, loyal husband whom I'd trusted without question, looked like a complete stranger in that damning image. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Over the next few weeks, I became a master of deception. I watched Dexter's every move, studiously cataloging any suspicious behavior while putting on an Oscar-worthy act that everything was normal. And there was plenty that seemed off. The long hours at his startup began stretching into the late evenings and weekends. He started placing his phone face down whenever I entered the room, quickly minimizing whatever was on the screen. And then there were the random phone calls he'd take in hushed tones, retreating to another room for privacy. "Everything okay?" I'd ask when he returned, playing dumb. "Yeah, just work stuff," he'd mutter dismissively. On the nights he did make it home for dinner, Dexter seemed distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. I'd watch him from across the table, studying the man I used to know like the back of my hand, now a complete enigma to me. One night, after another of his extended Saturdays at the office, enough was enough. As Dexter slipped out the front door yet again, I grabbed my coat and followed a safe distance behind. I tailed him through downtown, watching as he met up with a slim brunette outside a trendy bar. She greeted him with a tight hug and a kiss on the lips. My heart shattered into a million pieces. So it was true. The letter, the rumors, all of it. Dexter, my husband of 8 years, the one man I thought I could trust without doubt, was lying to me. And not just with his words, but with his body too. I wanted to confront them both right then and there, to rush up and unleash the unbridled fury and anguish consuming me from the inside out. But I didn't. I watched, seething in silence, as Dexter and his mistress slipped inside the bar hand in hand. Something inside me had snapped. The veil of blissful ignorance had been brutally torn away. My faith, my love, my life with Dexter, all built on lies. When he finally skulked home in the early morning hours, I was waiting. My face a stoic mask, the letter clutched in my hand. "Where were you?" I asked, point blank. Dexter looked caught off guard, like a kid with his hand trapped in the cookie jar. "I told you I had to work late at." "Don't lie to me." I hurled the crumpled letter at his feet. "I know about the woman. I saw you with her." A smirk crept across his lips, one I didn't recognize, like he had been waiting for this very moment. So you finally figured it out, about damn time. My palm connected with his cheek before I could stop it. But Dexter didn't even flinch, that same smug look plastered across his face. Who is she? I demanded through gritted teeth. How long has this been going on? Does it really matter? He gave a casual shrug. You know why people cheat, Renata? Because they've given up. On their partner, on the relationship, on themselves. His cruel words sliced me to the core. The man I loved was gone, replaced by this vile, unrecognizable monster. You're right, I said, struggling to maintain my composure. I did give up. On you. Turning on my heel, I stormed off to the guest bedroom and slammed the door behind me. The hurt and anger was like a raging inferno inside me now. But I wouldn't let it consume me. Not yet. I would harness that fire, let it fuel my determination, my hatred. And then, once I had the truth, the whole truth, I would take everything away from Dexter Wade. He thought he had given up on me. Well, now the gloves were off, and he was about to see how that mistake would cost him everything. You're being ridiculous, Dexter scoffed, throwing his hands up dismissively. This is all just a misunderstanding. I glared at him, clutching the damning letter in my trembling hands. A misunderstanding? You were caught red-handed with another woman. I can explain. Explain what? I snapped. How you've been lying to me for God knows how long, how you betrayed my trust in the most unforgivable way. Dexter opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. No, I don't want to hear any more of your pathetic excuses. His expression hardened into that infuriatingly smug look I had come to loathe. In that moment, he was a total stranger to me, worlds apart from the caring, devoted husband I thought I had married. You're overreacting, he said coldly. Women always do with these things. I recoiled like I'd been slapped. What did you just say to me? Dexter simply shrugged, seemingly relishing my shock and outrage. It was like he was baiting me, poking the bear just to get a reaction. Well, two could play at that game. If he wanted to match wits and see who could stoop lower, I would oblige him. Mustering all my strength, I finally regained my voice. You're right, you deserve a chance to explain yourself. I forced a sickly sweet smile, starting with why you've been deleting all your messages with this woman. Dexter visibly tensed up at my implication of having proof. Good, let him squirm for once. You've been going through my phone? His cheeks flushed red with anger. I nodded innocently. Among other things. Holding up a hand, I started ticking off examples. Having your car tracked, logging into your email, checking your credit card statements. His jaw clenched and those telltale veins bulged in his neck, the dead giveaway that he was enraged. Still, Dexter tried his best to appear calm and in control. You've completely lost it, do you know that? This obsessive jealousy, it's unhealthy. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Jealousy? That's just the latest in your sad litany of excuses, isn't it? My voice dripped with venom as I took a step closer, glaring right into his traitorous eyes. The truth is, I know everything, Dexter. I have evidence of your affair with Marla Jennings. All your emails, text messages, credit card statements for your dirty little hotel hookups. I paused to let that bombshell sink in before delivering the killing blow. Hell, I even made copies of the disgusting selfies you two would send each other. The blood drained from Dexter's face as the truth of my words hit him. Gone was his arrogance, his feigned superiority. He shrank back, finally realizing he was naked and exposed. How? Was all he could choke out. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I gave a harsh, humorless laugh. That I wouldn't fight for the life you ripped apart? That familiar vein in his neck throbbed furiously now. I could practically see the gears turning, his mind scrambling for an escape hatch, any excuse, any lie that might spare him from the reckoning he deserved. But it was too damn late. You made your bed, Dexter, I growled, feeling a small sense of victory at holding all the cards for once. No more lies, no more deceptions. It's time to face the consequences. I turned and stormed out of the room before he could utter another word of protest. Let him sit and stew in his guilt and shame for once. From here on out, I made the rules. I would dictate every calculated move, and Dexter would soon realize that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. The words burned like acid as they left my mouth. Marla Jennings? You've been sleeping with Marla? My so-called friend visibly recoiled, her face drained of all color. I knew I had her cornered. The evidence was irrefutable. Renata, I don't know what to say. Marla's voice trembled as tears welled up in her eyes. A flicker of pity flashed through me before being promptly extinguished by my burning rage. Don't bother. I shoved a manila envelope into her hands, printouts of emails, texts, and other proof of her torrid affair with my husband. The truth is all right here, in breathtaking detail. The lies, the deception, the hotel receipts. My lip curled with disgust. Oh, and my personal favorite, those X-rated selfies you two would send each other. Real classy stuff. Shame and mortification washed over Marla's face as she feebly thumbed through the incriminating evidence. She opened and closed her mouth wordlessly, any excuse or justification catching in her throat. I could have taken some satisfaction in her discomfort and humiliation. But in that moment, I only felt a slicing betrayal, not just from Dexter, but from someone I considered practically a sister. We shared everything, from joys and heartbreaks to hopes and dreams for the future. And yet she had zero qualms about backstabbing me in the most unforgivable way. So much for loyalty. So much for our friendship meaning anything. How could you do this to me? I demanded through clenched teeth, fighting back hot tears of hurt and fury. After everything we've been through together, everything I confided in you about my struggles with Dexter. Marla swallowed hard, her expression an uncomfortable blend of shame and defiance. I never meant to hurt you, Renata. You have to believe me. Bullshit. The harshness of my own voice startled me. That's exactly what you intended to do, sneaking around behind my back, spreading your legs for my husband. It's not like that, she shot back, a sudden fire in her eyes. I love Dexter. He loves me. We made a real connection, something you couldn't understand. I recoiled, feeling like I'd been physically struck. A real connection? You're delusional. Marla shook her head adamantly. Dexter wanted to leave you. He told me all about your failing marriage and how miserable he was. He pursued me from the start. Of course he did. It was all becoming disgustingly clear now. Dexter's modus operandi of lies, deception, and avoidance of taking any responsibility. Marla was just another smoking gun in his trail of shattered trust and broken vows. Don't kid yourself, I spat. My husband is a coward and a pathological liar. It's all he knows. He manipulated you just as easily as he manipulated me. Tears streamed down Marla's face, smearing her makeup into an ugly mess. A sick part of me relished the sight. You're wrong, she croaked out weakly. We have something real. He loves me. The desperate, hollow look in her eyes confirmed my suspicions. She was nothing more than Dexter's latest victim, another conquest willingly ensnared by his false promises and smooth-talking mind games. Marla was pathetic. But Dexter, he was the true monster I needed to stop. Without another word, I pivoted and stormed away, my mind already strategizing the most fitting retribution. An eye for an eye, that's what he would get. And once this was all over, Dexter would finally understand the bone-deguish and humiliation he put me through. I would return that pain tenfold. The fury blazed within me, consuming any mercy or sympathy I once might have felt. Dexter had demolished everything, my love, my trust, and the future we had planned together. Now it was my turn to watch everything he cared about go up in glorious, well-deserved flames. I paced back and forth in my living room, hands trembling as I clutched the damning evidence of Dexter and Marla's affair. My mind was racing, formulating a plan to make them pay for their unforgivable betrayal. Exposing their sordid secrets wouldn't be enough. I wanted complete and utter devastation, to obliterate everything they'd worked towards, to leave them as empty and hollow as I felt. A delicious vengeance, retribution for the agonizing pain they'd put me through. With each calculated step, the scheme took shape. I'd strike fast and without mercy. Let the shockwave ripple through our entire social circle and professional networks. By the time I was done, Dexter and Marla's lives would be in smoking ruins. My phone buzzed, jarring me from my revenge-addled thoughts. A text from Dexter. We need to talk. I smirked, picturing the desperation consuming him now that I finally held all the cards. Let him sweat it out a little longer. Several hours passed before I finally responded with 2 simple words. Your office. When I arrived at Dexter's sleek tech startup, his assistant gave me an uneasy look but didn't protest as I breezed past her desk and into his corner office. He was hunched over his laptop, pinching the bridge of his nose like a man grappling with the weight of the world. "This is a professional environment," I announced coolly, making sure my voice carried. "So let's keep things professional, shall we?" Dexter flinched, clearly not expecting my detached bravado. When our eyes met, the pathetic resignation on his face almost made me smirk. Almost. "How could you do this to me?" His words were laced with quiet anguish. "To our marriage?" I arched an eyebrow incredulously. "Are you seriously asking me that question, after everything you've done?" "I never meant to hurt you," Dexter pleaded, attempting one of his charm offensives. But the act held no sway over me, not anymore. Things just got out of hand with Marla. Before I knew it, I was in too deep. Too deep. I fought back a scathing laugh at his paper-thin excuses. "You don't get to play the victim here, not after you systematically destroyed my ability to trust." My voice dripped with disdain. "Secrets, lies, cheating. That's all you know how to do, isn't it?" Pain flashed across his features, my verbal blows clearly landing. "Good. I made a mistake," he conceded hoarsely. "A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But you have to believe I never stopped loving you, Renata. You're everything to me." He reached across the desk in a pleading gesture, but I instinctively recoiled from his grasp like it was a venomous snake. "Save it," I hissed. "Your silver tongue stopped working on me a long time ago." This time, Dexter didn't try to mask the hurt etched across his face. He swallowed hard, seeming to accept that there was no coming back from this, no smooth talking his way out of the devastation he'd caused. And I was just getting started. "You want to know how this is going to play out?" I asked, keeping my tone, untarnished detachment. "First, I'm going to take this evidence of your affair with Marla." I tossed the manila envelope onto his desk with a dull thud. "And I'm going to share it with everyone. Our friends, your investors, current and prospective clients, the whole damn world if I have to." "And then?" he croaked out, eyes swimming with apprehensive dread. A slow, sinister smile crept across my lips. "Then you can kiss everything goodbye. Your company, your reputation, whatever sad delusions of happiness you had with Marla. All of it. You won't have a goddamn thing left to your name when I'm finished with you." Silence hung heavy over the room as Dexter absorbed the crushing weight of my vowed promise. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly like a fish gasping for air. I held his gaze unflinchingly, drinking in every agonizing moment as the first droplets of my vengeance began raining down upon him. "See you around," I muttered coolly, turning on my heel to leave. Or maybe not. The party was in full swing by the time I arrived, fashionably late. Laughter and the clink of champagne glasses filled the air as Dexter's friends and business associates mingled around the modern event space. I scanned the crowd until my eyes found my soon-to-be ex-husband holding court near the bar with his latest fling, Marla, draped all over him. They made for a perfectly punchable portrait of arrogance and entitlement, blissfully unaware of the reckoning that was coming. Taking a fortifying breath, I smoothed out the front of my red dress, chosen specifically for the occasion. Like crimson battle armor, striking and unignorable. This was my moment, after all. I crossed the sleek concrete floor with purposeful strides, briefly catching the eye of Dexter's assistant, Kelly. Her expression glazed over with trepidation, no doubt sensing the storm brewing behind my eyes. "Smart girl." "Renata, you made it!" A fake, toothy grin stretched across Dexter's face as he lifted his glass towards me. "We were starting to wonder if you'd show. And miss your big night?" I matched his artificial cheeriness, turning it back on him with sickening sweetness. "Wouldn't dream of it, dear." Marla's owlish gaze bounced back and forth between us like a spectator at a tennis match. I could practically see the worry gnawing away at her. The two of us making niceties through gritted teeth, the tension crackling like lightning about to strike. A small crowd had begun to gather around us, their interest clearly piqued by Dexter and I's impromptu reunion. Let them ogle and gossip like the privileged vultures they were. Their morbid curiosity was about to be satisfied. "Well," I proclaimed loudly, forcing an exaggerated smile as I scanned the rapt faces surrounding us, "I actually have a bit of an announcement to make." Dexter's bravado faltered as our eyes met again. My cold stare sent an unmistakable message that whatever came next would not be good. At least, not for him or his lover. Reaching into my clutch, I retrieved the sealed manila envelope that had been burning a hole through my purse lining for weeks. I held it aloft, letting everyone take in the suspicious package. You see, my dearest husband here has been keeping a few secrets. I paused to allow the confused murmurs to swell briefly before continuing. Intimate secrets he's been sharing with a very close friend. Half the room seemed oblivious while the other tensed, sensing the impending bombshell about to detonate in their midst. Dexter turned toward me with panic smeared across his features, any plea for mercy dying on his lips. No mercy would be shown this night. With a series of loud rips, I tore open the envelope and began pulling out its contents. Page after page of incriminating evidence of Dexter's torrid affair with Marla. Explicit text exchanges, scandalous photos, travel records, and receipts from their tawdry trysts. You see, while I've been home picking out baby names, Dexter's been picking out baby makers, I declared in a booming voice. And wouldn't you know, he chose the brightest bulb from our inner circle to stick it to. I threw the final few photos into the air, letting them flutter down like confetti across the speechless crowd and their horrified faces. Marla let out a strangled sob, frantically grasping at Dexter, as if he could somehow shield her from the nuclear fallout she'd been complicit in creating. "You lying son of a bitch!" someone shouted in disbelief. The catcalls and mutters of disgust rolled through the stunned audience like a tidal wave. I stood there, back straight and chin high, reveling in the carnage as Dexter's world burned all around him. Finally, after weeks of meticulous planning, my revenge was complete. Spinning on my heel, I strode away from the wreckage, casting one last look over my shoulder at Dexter. The hollowed, haunted expression carving his features nearly made me crack a smile. I had warned him about the consequences of betraying me. Now he got to witness the pulverizing aftermath up close. Let him choke on the ashes of everything he'd so arrogantly squandered. His business, his status, his future with that two-faced snake Marla. It was all gone, vanished in a single glorious gasper. As for me, I was free, untethered from years of torment and anguish. Finally, at long last, the shackles of Dexter Walsh's lies had been undone. It was time to let the healing begin. The fallout was swift and merciless, exactly as I'd envisioned. Within days, the collapse of Dexter's carefully cultivated life was splattered across every gossip rag and tech blog in Seattle. The disgraced CEO, felled by his own tawdry affair and web of deceit that came unspooled so publicly. Good. Let them run those scandalous pictures and seedy text exchanges on a continuous loop for all I cared. The more reputational damage inflicted on Dexter, the better. Across town, the lawyers were circling like sharks, each enabler and business associate looking to distance themselves from the implosion of Dexter's startup. Major investors pulled funding. Longtime partners cut ties. In a matter of days, everything he'd spent years building disintegrated into a smoldering ruin of hubris and betrayal. I'd orchestrated the perfect demolition, the ultimate retribution against the man who had so callously tormented me with lies and infidelity for far too long. With each ticking update of Dexter's downward spiral, a grim smile crept across my lips. This was the justice I'd hungered for from that first vicious sting of betrayal. To see him stripped bare of every ill-gotten gain, every shred of arrogance and self-importance dismantled along with his sordid, depraved legacy. The real gut punch, though, came from the most unlikely of sources. Dexter's mistress turned accomplice in his own destruction. Marla had been uncharacteristically silent in the days following my explosive reveal, no doubt licking her wounds and grappling with the seismic embarrassment of her home-wrecking ways being thrust into the harsh spotlight. Once the initial shock faded, however, her near-feral self-preservation instincts kicked in. I was alerted of her publicity tour by a string of frantic texts from Dexter, each one more pathetic than the last. "She's lying. Everything Marla's saying, it's all lies. You have to stop her, Renata. She's out for blood." "I never wanted to hurt you. You were my world." I barely made it through his sniveling pleas before hurling my phone against the wall, cackling at his feeble, desperate attempts at salvaging what minuscule scraps of dignity he had left. Flipping on the TV, I was greeted by Marla's smug face on the screen, that familiar, self-satisfied sneer sketched across her features. The had certainly grown a pair now that the opportunity for vengeance had arisen. Dexter made a lot of promises to me about leaving his wife and starting a new life together, she proclaimed to the salivating reporter. He laid it on thick, talking about soulmates and true loves conquering all that garbage. I rolled my eyes at the cloying sentiment, knowing full well the slimy game Dexter played. He'd mastered the art of telling women exactly what they wanted to hear in order to get what he desired. But it was all a ploy, you see, Marla continued. Standard operating procedure for Dexter Walsh. The lies, the manipulation, the complete lack of conscience when it came to using people to get what he wanted. On the screen, she held up a sheaf of papers and photos that looked disturbingly similar to the package I'd used to expose their affair. I have proof here of Dexter's countless indiscretions, records of the hotels, the emails, all the sordid details of how he betrayed his wife and took advantage of me. He's a selfish, dishonest coward who only cares about himself. The searing diatribe set my soul ablaze, every word piercing through me like a vindicating dagger's caress. At last, someone else could see and acknowledge Dexter for the venomous serpent he truly was. I leaned back and soaked in every lashing second of it. On the TV, Marla's face was contorted into a mask of white-hot fury, utterly unrestrained in her quest to obliterate whatever feeble existence Dexter may have reassembled. He'd played with fire one too many times, scorching both of us in ways that could never be forgiven nor forgotten. Now the burner was getting burned. A lifetime of transgressions finally catching up in one cataclysmic inferno of consequences. And I had a front-row seat to witness every glorious, well-deserved flame. You've turned into something unrecognizable. Dexter's words hung heavy in the air, more indictment than observation. His eyes bored into me with a searing intensity, as if he could somehow will me into feeling an ounce of remorse or shame. I simply shrugged, impervious to his desperate pleas for absolution. Maybe I'm just done playing the meek, subservient wife you thought you could walk all over. His face contorted with that all-too-familiar mix of rage and indignation. Is that what you think? That I looked down on you, treated you like some second-class citizen? Rolling my eyes, I shot back without missing a beat. Your actions spoke louder than any of your lies or hollow apologies ever could, Dexter. You don't get to be the victim here, not after everything you put me through. He opened his mouth to protest again, but I silenced him with a raised hand. Save it. I'm done caring about your justifications or what delusions you've cooked up to absolve yourself of guilt. My voice was a razor's edge, daring him to challenge me further. The papers have been signed, the given. It's over. Dexter's shoulders slumped in defeat. In that moment, he looked every bit the haunted, broken husk of a man his actions had reduced him to. Good. Let him marinate in the consequences he so richly deserved. I turned on my heel, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his ruined life. Outside, the crisp spring air filled my lungs, reinvigorating and purifying with each deep breath. After months of anguish and despair, the shackles had finally been cast off. Dexter no longer had any hold over me or the power to inflict any more damage. His humiliating downfall and loss of reputation were the ultimate form of recompense, a scorching case of karma come full circle. In the coming days and weeks, I focused on rebuilding, renovating the house to depict my fresh start, cleansing every last remnant of Dexter's stain from the home we'd once shared. Our twisted marriage had been corrosive, near fatal to my sense of self-worth and identity. But now, alone and unshackled by his toxic influence, I was reclaiming it all. My friends and family rallied around me, offering sympathies and support, though I waved them off with polite yet firm dismissals. I didn't need their pity. What I'd done was an act of self-preservation, a protective right to purge myself of Dexter's miasmic presence in my life once and for all. In time, the calls from reporters and paparazzi grew less frequent as my role in Dexter's spectacular downfall became old news, eclipsed by fresh scandals and salacious stories. My name faded from the spotlight just as I preferred it, quietly, anonymously receding into the background as an unassuming graphic designer once again. Dexter, on the other hand, would never have that privilege, not after the way his personal depravities had been laid startlingly bare before the world. Disgraced, destitute, and most unforgivably alone. Deserted by his fair-weather friends and opportunistic leeches the moment his status and wealth evaporated. Only Marla remained, and even her continued involvement was undoubtedly self-serving, a final act of vengeance before disappearing into oblivion as well. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I received a letter, an unsigned, handwritten plea for forgiveness and understanding. Even without a name attached, I recognized Dexter's distinctive scrawl immediately, that same elegant penmanship which had once professed eternal devotion and fidelity, until his pretty words curdled into lies and infidelity. I didn't bother opening the letter, merely tossed it into the crackling fireplace and watched the pages curl and blacken as the carefully inked epithets turned to ashes. No more words, rationalizations, or empty promises. Dexter had gambled everything for his tawdry indiscretions, and the house had folded around him. He was the architect of his own devastation and karmic reckoning. All that was left for me was to let the purifying flames run their course, scouring away the last vestiges of his poisonous influence over me. From those smoldering embers I would be born anew, emboldened, resilient, and finally free. The rest of my life was awaiting, full of infinite possibilities, uncompromised by Dexter's shadow, and I had no intentions of looking back any longer.
I moved in with my daughter Diana to start a fresh chapter of my life after my divorce from Albert was confirmed. After this changeover for around 8 months, something unexpected happened. I was having some downtime with Diana at home on one of my days off when I got a strange call from my mom. She told me that without warning, Albert and his mother had come up at my parents' house. I hastily got dressed and rushed over to my parents' house, feeling both curious and alarmed. I arrived to find Albert and his mother sitting on the living room sofa, seemingly anticipating my arrival. I questioned, perplexed by their presence, "Why are you here in my parents' house?" Albert surprised me with his response. "I want you to return the money you owe me," he commanded. "Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Judy, a 38-year-old employee in an office." After 10 years of marriage, Albert and I had a daughter named Diana, who is currently enrolled in the 8th grade. His kind, gregarious, and upbeat personality drew us in right away on our blind date. We went from being high school sweethearts to life partners, and after a year of dating, he proposed. My close-knit circle of high school pals attended our happy wedding. We were all intricately entwined in one another's life, commemorating significant occasions in tandem. Eventually, every friend in this close-knit group found a spouse and tied the knot, forming a close-knit group of married people. Our family was joyful, and I always thought that our house would be a haven of love and support. Our close-knit circle of friends changed from carefree singles to married adults as we grew older. I declared my pregnancy shortly after, and it appeared that my pals did the same. We quickly became a group of mothers who shared the pleasures and difficulties of becoming parents with one another. We seemed to be riding the waves of life together, and I had no doubt that our friendship would endure forever. I cherished my dual roles as both a wife and a mother, and I was equally passionate about my career. After graduating from college, I secured a position in the planning and development department of a large corporation. My days were packed, and the work was demanding yet fulfilling. Each day brought new lessons and challenges. One of my friends, a stay-at-home mom, once playfully teased me, saying, "You're a workaholic, Judy, but you also manage to maintain a wonderful family life. It's almost as if you're living 2 lives." She admired my strength, though I often joked that I wished I had the boundless energy typical of a robust man. Both Albert and Diana play pivotal roles in helping me decompress after long days at the office. When I arrived home, I was greeted by Diana's bright, "Oh, Mommy, welcome home." Her youthful enthusiasm and warm hugs melted away the day's fatigue. Albert had transitioned to part-time work at a local cafe after Diana was born, allowing him to take on the primary responsibilities of picking her up from school and preparing dinner. This arrangement not only supported my career, but also ensured that I returned home to a freshly cooked meal, which was a tremendous relief. Albert's thoughtful cooking allowed me to unwind and feel rejuvenated. Evenings at home were a cherished ritual. Diana and I would often take baths together, chatting about our days and sharing little stories. This simple, everyday interaction was a source of immense joy and fulfillment. My life was a beautiful balance of professional achievements and home life bliss, all made possible by the unwavering support and kindness of Albert and Diana. Their support not only bolstered my energy, but also deepened my dedication and passion for my work. Together, we had crafted a life that was as rewarding as it was busy, proving that with the right support, one could indeed have it all. As my career progressed and I began to achieve significant results, I was rewarded with a promotion. With this new position came increased responsibilities, leading me to work more overtime and often arrive home quite late. By this time, Diana had grown older and had a better grasp of the demands of my job, which allowed her to manage more on her own. Meanwhile, Albert also increased his hours at the cafe, further immersing himself in the world of coffee. Lately, I have taken to exploring various coffee shops, indulging in their unique coffee beans. Even today, I have brought home some beans along with cakes from a new bakery I discovered. I suggested we enjoy them together with coffee, excited to share this with Albert, who had become quite passionate about roasting and experimenting with different types of beans at his job. This made the coffee he brewed at home exceptionally good. Albert and Diana were both very supportive of my dedication to my career. But despite their understanding, I started to notice a gradual distancing within our family. The first sign that something was amiss came when Diana approached me with a concern. "What's up? You wanted to talk about something?" I asked her. "The other day when I went to see a movie with friends, I saw Dad with another woman," she revealed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I was taken aback, shocked by her words. Diana continued, "They weren't holding hands or anything, but they seemed quite close. Lately, I've noticed Dad talking a lot on the phone before you get home. Sometimes he's so engrossed that he doesn't listen to me. He looks happy while he's on the phone. At first, I thought he was texting or talking to you. But after seeing him with that woman, I'm starting to wonder if he was talking to her instead." As she spoke, Diana's expression was filled with sadness. Being in middle school, she was acutely aware and sensitive to such matters, and it was clear she felt troubled by this observation. I was equally stunned. The thought that Albert, who I believed always prioritized Diana, might be involved with someone else was heartbreaking. This revelation required a careful and sensitive approach, as our family's unity was at stake. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I didn't realize we were making you feel this way. I've been too focused on work, haven't I?" I said, feeling a twinge of guilt as I looked at Diana. "No, it's okay that you work hard, Mom. Don't feel bad about that," Diana reassured me, her maturity at that moment beyond her years. I was touched by her understanding and compassion. "Thank you, Diana," I replied, my heart heavy. "I'll talk to your dad about this. If it turns out he's having an affair, I think I'll have to consider a divorce. Is that okay with you?" She nodded solemnly. I don't like the idea of Dad having an affair. Just knowing that and still being with him would make me feel bad. Seeing Diana so distressed made me realize just how much I had overlooked our family's needs. Determined to address this head-on, especially since Diana had bravely brought it up, I decided to hire a private investigator to delve into Albert's activities. The findings were as shocking as they were conclusive. Albert was indeed having an affair, just as Diana suspected, and there was photographic evidence to prove it. What stunned me most was the identity of his affair partner. Tiffany, one of my high school classmates, and a fellow member of our mom's group. I was more hurt by this betrayal from a trusted friend than by Albert's infidelity. Tiffany, a stay-at-home mom and supposedly a loyal friend in our group, had her young child, yet she was involved with Albert, neglecting her family commitments. Upon seeing the evidence, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Alone in my room, I was grateful that Diana hadn't walked in on me during this moment. The photos would have only added to her distress. I wasn't ready to confront Albert yet, nor could I let Diana see these disturbing images. I took a few deep breaths to compose myself. Shortly after, another friend from the mom's group mentioned she had changed jobs, which sparked an idea. I suggested we all get together, seeing it as a perfect opportunity to observe Tiffany without revealing that I knew about the affair. The gathering was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I quietly contacted a lawyer and began preparing for a potential divorce, fortifying myself for the challenges ahead. I took a moment to gently inform Diana about what I had uncovered and the inevitable decision that her dad and I would be getting a divorce. Together, we spent our free time searching for a new apartment, trying to find a space that would signify a fresh start for us both. As the day of the planned get-together approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. When the day finally arrived, I engaged in casual conversation with my friends, starting with asking about one friend's new job before we all shared updates on our lives. Tiffany seemed oblivious to the fact that I knew her secret. During the conversation, she lamented her routine life, saying, "I'm just a housewife stuck in the same routine. Unlike all of you who have careers, you don't have to work because your husband supports you." Another friend pointed out, "I do appreciate my husband." Tiffany replied, "But sometimes I feel a little bored." It was then that I decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "So is that why you're having an affair with other people's husbands?" I asked, turning directly to Tiffany. The room fell silent, and the casual ambience quickly shifted to tension. "Ah, Judy, what do you mean by that?" Tiffany stammered, her face draining of color. "It seems that Tiffany is having an affair with my husband, Albert," I declared plainly. "What? No way. You must be joking." Another friend interjected, trying to defend Tiffany, taking advantage of the disbelief. Tiffany tried to deflect. "That's right, Judy." "What are you talking about?" "Oliva." "Sudden, you must have confused me with someone else." "Oh, really?" I countered, my voice steady. "Then why don't you all take a look at this?" I reached into my bag, pulled out the photos, and spread them out on the table for everyone to see. The room erupted into gasps of disbelief. "Oh my gosh," they gasped, turning to Tiffany for explanations. Tiffany, clearly caught off guard and unable to deny the evidence before her, covered her mouth with her hand. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I happened to walk into the cafe where your husband works. I didn't know he worked there initially, but then I started going there regularly. My husband provides for me, but he's been neglecting me since we got married." I was feeling lonely, Tiffany continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. Despite her emotional response and attempts to justify her actions, the betrayal cut deep. An affair, particularly with a friend's husband, was a breach of trust that was hard to overlook. Her reasons, while they might explain her actions, didn't excuse them. The revelation was painful but necessary, as it confirmed the reality I had begun to suspect and reshaped the dynamics of our friendship and personal lives. Throughout the confrontation, I maintained my composure, unaffected by Tiffany's tears. "I'm sorry to everyone else here, but Tiffany, I need to let you know that I will be seeking alimony from you," I announced firmly. I had also taken a formal step earlier that day. I sent a certified letter to your mailbox. Today, your husband should have already seen it. Tiffany's face fell as she absorbed the weight of the situation. "Oh no," she murmured, a mix of worry and disbelief in her voice. "How could he do something so terrible?" she asked, still reeling from the shock. "It's far worse to have an affair with a friend's husband, especially when you're married and have a child." I replied, steady and resolute, "You need to face the consequences and make amends for your actions." Visibly shaken, Tiffany nodded her acknowledgement. One of my friends chimed in, "We really can't trust you anymore, Tiffany." With that, we left the restaurant, leaving Tiffany to grapple with the fallout. Once I dealt with Tiffany, it was time to confront Albert. I was fairly certain that Tiffany had already informed him about what had transpired. When I arrived home, Albert was waiting at the door, his expression panicked. "What have you done?" "I just got a call from Tiffany." "Are you making our affair public?" "How could you be so terrible?" "You acted like a good husband, but you were cheating on me." And no, it's not just about exposing Tiff. "How could you do that to her family?" I retorted, "It's ridiculous." I continued, my tone firm, "It seems people who have affairs think alike. You believe that as long as the other person doesn't find out, it's not a big deal. But what you did was wrong, and it all needs to be revealed as part of your punishment. That's why I'm going to divorce you and seek alimony and child support." Faced with clear evidence of the affair, Albert could not deny the truth. He agreed to the divorce, though he was initially hesitant about the financial implications. Once I hired a strong lawyer and made it clear I was prepared to take the case to court if necessary, he finally consented to the financial arrangements. Following the divorce, Albert sold the house we had lived in and moved to a new apartment. I pursued and received alimony from both Albert and Tiffany, totaling $50,000 from each. Additionally, I secured child support from Albert. Once everything was settled, Diana and I began our new life together. Though the ordeal was deeply traumatic for me, the experience, while painful, marked the start of a new chapter where we could seek peace and rebuild our lives. Over time, the emotional wounds from my divorce began to heal. However, about 8 months later, I faced a new challenge. While I was enjoying a relaxed day at home with Diana, my peace was disrupted by an urgent call from my mother. She informed me that my ex-husband Albert and his mother had unexpectedly shown up at my parents' house and had forced their way inside without permission. My father was not home at the time, so my concerned mother quickly rang me up. I hurriedly prepared myself and went over to my parents' house. Upon arriving, I found Albert and his mother sitting nonchalantly on the living room sofa as if they belonged there. Confused and a bit alarmed, I asked, "What are you both doing here at my parents' house?" All of a sudden, Albert's response was shocking. He demanded, "I want you to give me back the money you owe me." "Huh, I never borrowed any money from you," I replied, perplexed. He retorted, "I paid $225,000 for our wedding. Remember, you were in charge of the wedding, so that money was lent to you. Now that we're divorced, you're claiming it was all a fraud. Honestly, I could sue you for marriage fraud, but for now, all I want is that $25,000 back as a settlement." This unreasonable request took me aback. His mother also chimed in, insisting that I pay him as soon as possible. It became clear that Albert was struggling financially, which might have been driving his irrational demands. He had taken a full-time job at the cafe where he used to work part-time, but the pay was modest. Firmly, I reminded him, we both were equally involved in the wedding, and I paid more of our living expenses than you did. The $25,000 is just a small part of what I contributed. Don't bother me with such unreasonable demands. As the tension escalated, they refused to leave. Just then, my father arrived, having been alerted by my mother. "What are you guys doing here?" he demanded sternly. Albert repeated his claims to my father, who, although usually calm, was visibly furious and shocked by Albert's audacious demands. "It's your fault for having an affair in the first place. If you're going to make such outrageous demands, get out of here," my father asserted, trying to expel them from the house. In a desperate turn, Albert fell to his knees and begged, "Please, Judy, lend me money. Not only are you demanding alimony, but Tiffany's husband is also after me and I can't afford it. Even $6,000 would help." It was disheartening to see him in such a state begging for money. However, I responded firmly, "No, I can't do that. Go home." The situation highlighted the deep desperation Albert was experiencing, but also reaffirmed my resolve to maintain boundaries and protect my family's peace. As the situation with my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law escalated, my father intervened, suggesting he'd handle it. "Fine, I'll get the money." "Just wait here," he said calmly and walked to another room. Curious, I followed him. With a mischievous grin, he said, "Well, I have plenty of money. Since we have it, why not give it to them?" He opened the closet and pulled out some cash, creating a sense of suspense. I wondered how this would play out, mused silently. My father then put the bills into an envelope and handed it to Albert. With faces lit up with satisfaction, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law left with the envelope, thinking their plan had worked. As soon as they stepped out, I locked the door behind them and made a quick call to the police. It didn't take long for Albert and his mother to realize the money was fake. They rushed back, pounding on our door in anger. "Hey, what's going on? This is monopoly money. I don't want this fake cash," Albert shouted, his voice thick with fury. I couldn't help but laugh as I responded through the door. "Since we have so much of it, I thought I'd share it with you." Albert's frustration peaked, and he began banging even harder, now kicking the door with his feet. Their actions only escalated the situation further. As Albert and his mother wreaked havoc on our door, the police arrived and caught them in the act. The scene drew the attention of the neighbors, many of whom witnessed their arrest. In the end, not only did Albert not get any money, but he was also fined for the disturbance and had to cover the damage to our front door. Ironically, one of the bystanders was a regular at the cafe where Albert worked, and word of his antics spread quickly. As a result, Albert lost his job and found himself struggling to find new work. He had to move back in with his parents, and his in-laws ended up covering his alimony and child support payments. To safeguard my family further, I filed a restraining order against my former in-laws, ensuring that any future incidents would lead to an immediate police response. Now life is more peaceful and fulfilling. I'm devoted to working hard and relishing the time watching my daughter Diana grow up. My name is Lily, and I'm 31. 9 years my senior Larry, and I recently tied the knot. But shall we take a brief diversion first? I'd like to tell you about the day I met Larry. It was at one of our parents' elegant garden parties that they used to throw. Larry, the new emerging star at his father's company, was 29 years old, and I was 20 years old, fresh out of high school. I recall him approaching me while holding a glass of champagne. He said, his voice as silky as silk, "Lily, right. I've heard a lot about you." I blushed, not knowing quite what to say. "Are you Larry as well?" I answered, "I've heard a lot about you too." My heart skipped a beat as I heard him laugh. "Hopefully everything goes well," he remarked. We laughed, spoke, and, to my surprise, connected in a way I hadn't anticipated for the remainder of the evening. Our parents began discussing our marriage when they saw us together that evening. After several more years, their plan eventually came to pass. We both signed a prenuptial agreement before we were married. It was simple. Either of us could dissolve the union and pocket the $7 million if the other cheated. I signed it without thinking because I didn't want to cheat. I recall that day when we signed that contract. My father, a quiet man with a large heart, gave me a worried look. His voice was firm but slightly worried as he questioned, "Are you sure you're okay with this, Lily?" I comforted him, "Dad, it's fine," and gave him a brief hug. Both Larry and I are trustworthy. It's merely a formality. It was Larry who insisted on signing the document, and Larry was present as well. He uttered, "I don't want you to feel pressured," Lily, in a somewhat strained voice. "If you're not comfortable with this, we can talk about it more." However, I simply gave him a smile and shook my head. "I'm okay with it, Larry. I have faith in you." He smiled warmly at me, clearly relieved. He answered, "And I trust you, Lily." That marked the start of our joint journey. Everyone spoke about the lavish ceremony we had for our marriage. I had no idea that a storm was approaching, but I was eager to begin this new chapter in my life. We relocated to a lovely home outside of the city after the wedding. Living with Larry and waking up beside him every morning was like living out a fantasy. For a time, everything appeared ideal with him. He was kind and considerate. Our fairy tale-like honeymoon was unforgettable. We basked in the sun and one another's companionship for 3 weeks at an exquisite beach resort. But things started to change after we got home. Larry changed, becoming a man immersed in contemplation all the time. He began arriving home from work later than usual, and he would go straight to bed without saying good night. We started eating at various times, sleeping in different rooms, and hardly speaking to one another. I chose to face him one day. "Larry," I responded, attempting to maintain my composure. "What's the deal?" "Since we returned from our vacation, you have been behaving strangely." His eyes were no longer as warm as they used to be when he gazed at me. He avoided making eye contact and said, "I've just been busy with work, Lily." "But we don't really talk anymore," I said. "We're living like strangers in our own home." With a groan, he combed through his hair. "I am aware. I apologize. I'll do my best to schedule additional time for us." However, nothing altered. Actually, things grew worse. Even later, often even until the wee hours of the morning, Larry began to return home. We hardly saw each other anymore after he stopped eating with me. I began to have doubts. Was he seeing someone else? The thought made me feel sick, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I decided to confront him again. "Larry," I said one night when he came home late, "are you seeing someone else?" He looked shocked by my question. "What? No, Lily. I would never do that to you." "Then why are you always out? You never spend time with me," I said, tears filling my eyes. "I told you, it's just work," he said firmly. "I'm not cheating on you, lie." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Larry was not the same man I had married. He was distant, cold, and seemed to be hiding something. I didn't know what to do. I love Larry, but I couldn't keep living like this. I decided to start investigating. If Larry wasn't going to tell me what was happening, I needed to find out for myself. I began by checking his phone when he was in the shower. I felt guilty for invading his privacy, but I was desperate for answers. I didn't find any suspicious messages or calls, but I did find something that made my heart sink. Larry had been searching for apartments. Was he planning to leave me? I confronted him about it. "Larry, why are you looking for apartments? Are you planning on leaving me?" He looked shocked. "No, Lily, I was just looking. I wasn't planning on leaving you." Then why were you looking? I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know, Lily, he said, barely whispering. I just need some space. One day, I decided to talk to my mom about it. She's always been my support, the person I turn to when things get tough. Mom, I said, I don't know what to do. Larry has changed. He's not the same person anymore. My mom listened, concern written all over her face. Lily, she said, you're both still adjusting. You're newlyweds. It takes time to build a life together. I wanted to believe her, to think that this was just a phase and that things would get better. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Larry was hiding something. I could feel it. I tried to push the feeling away, trying to convince myself that Mom was right. But the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't go away, constantly reminding me that something was off. 3 weeks later, I gathered my courage and approached Larry. I need a job, I said, looking him in the eye. He seemed surprised. You want to work? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. Yes, I need to do something, Larry. I can't just sit at home all day. He thought for a moment, then said, I can offer you a job at my foundation. We help kids in tough situations. Would you be interested? I was surprised. Larry's foundation was well known for its work with children, and I had always admired what they did. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'd love to. Working at the foundation was a breath of fresh air. I was busy in doing something meaningful. I met kids who were strong and resilient, kids who had gone through more hardships than any child should. It was heartbreaking, but also inspiring. The job kept me busy and helped me take my mind off the problems at home. Larry and I were struggling, but at least during the day, I had something else to focus on. The work was tough and emotionally draining, but it was worth it. I felt like I was making a difference, like I was doing something important. For the first time in a long while, I felt happy. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Larry was acting strange and distant. I couldn't figure out what it was, but I knew something was off. I was determined to find out. With a heavy heart full of questions and doubts, I decided to hire a private detective. I needed to know if Larry was cheating on me. It wasn't just about my pride, it was about my peace of mind. I couldn't live with constant uncertainty, always wondering what had gone wrong. There was also the prenup we signed before getting married. If Larry was cheating, it wouldn't just be a betrayal. It would be a costly mistake. I found a detective agency in the city run by a man named Tyler. He was an ex-cop, a seasoned veteran with a sharp eye and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him my story and my suspicions. He listened, his face expressionless. I'll do my best, Lily, he said when I finished. But I can't promise anything. If your husband is cheating, he's doing a good job of hiding it. I nodded, understanding. I just need to know, Tyler. One way or another, I need to know. I remember the day he came back to give me his report. His face was serious, his eyes filled with sympathy. I'm sorry, Lily, he said. I couldn't find any evidence that your husband is cheating on you. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of me was glad that Larry wasn't cheating, but another part of me was frustrated. If he wasn't cheating, then why did he leave? What was he hiding? Are you sure, Tyler? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There's nothing at all. Tyler shook his head. I'm sorry, Lily. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I thanked Tyler and paid him for his services. As I watched him leave, I felt a deep sense of loss. I was back where I started, with more questions than answers. One day, while I was working at a charity event, a new guy walked in. His name was John. He was handsome, with a smile that could light up the room. He was smart with a quick wit and a sharp mind. He was funny with a sense of humor that made everyone laugh. He looked like a famous actor with his chiseled features and striking good looks. In short, he was my ideal man. But despite being drawn to John, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. His arrival seemed too perfect, too convenient. I couldn't help but think about Larry and our prenup. If I was caught cheating, I'd have to pay a huge sum of $7 million. Could John be a trap set by Larry to catch me? I decided to hire Tyler, the private detective I had used before. I asked him to investigate John and see if he had any connections to Larry. Tyler agreed to take the case and started digging into John's past and connections. He followed him, watched his movements and interactions. Tyler was thorough, leaving no stone unturned. In the meantime, I tried to keep my distance from John. It was hard, especially since he was so charming and attractive. But I had to be careful. I couldn't afford to fall into a trap, not when so much was at stake. One day, John asked me out for coffee. I was torn. Part of me wanted to say yes to get to know him better, but another part of me was scared, worried about what Tyler might find. "I'd love to, John," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm really busy right now. Maybe some other time." John seemed disappointed, but didn't push. "Sure, Lily," he said, his smile fading a bit. "Some other time." I felt a pang of guilt. What if I was wrong? What if John was just a nice guy, and I was letting my suspicions ruin something good? But I couldn't take the risk, not until I knew for sure. 5 days later, Tyler came to give me his report. His face was serious, his eyes hard. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, "but your suspicions were right. John is working for your husband." I felt a rush of emotions. Anger at Larry for trying to trap me, relief that I hadn't fallen for it, and sadness that John wasn't who I thought he was. But above all, I felt a sense of vindication. I wasn't imagining things. My suspicions were real. "Thank you, Tyler," I said, my voice catching with emotion. "You've done a great job." As I watched Tyler leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had dodged a bullet and avoided a costly mistake, but I also felt like I had lost something, the idea of the perfect man and the hope of finding love again. It was a hard truth to accept, but I wasn't going to let it bring me down. I was stronger than that. I was determined to move on and find happiness again. I didn't need an ideal man. I just needed someone who was real and honest, and I was going to find that person no matter what. Instead of sending John packing right then, I decided to take a different approach. I chose to play along and befriend him, all while keeping my behavior above board so Larry would have no reason to accuse me of anything. John, however, took my friendliness as a sign of something more. He started to relax, thinking he had me fooled. The irony was that he was the one being played, but I didn't let him in on the secret. I couldn't risk him running back to Larry, so I kept up the act and maintained a friendly facade. One day, I decided to take things up a notch. I asked John to join me for lunch, making it sound like a casual discussion about charity work. He agreed with a smug smile on his face, thinking he was making progress. We found a quiet spot in the cafe. "So, John," I began, "how are you finding the charity work?" He shrugged, a confident look in his eyes. "It's good. Different, but good." "And Larry?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you think of him?" John looked surprised. "Larry? He's okay, I guess. Why?" I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Just curious. He's a bit of a mystery, isn't he?" John laughed, clearly relieved. "Yeah, he can be hard to figure out." We continued chatting about work and life, and I made sure to keep my tone neutral, not giving him any reason to be suspicious. In the days that followed, I continued to play along, heaving up the friendly act but never crossing the line. It was a risky game, but one I was willing to play for now. One day during one of our lunch meetings, John looked at me with a serious expression. "You know, I've been thinking," John said. I raised an eyebrow, feeling a chill run down my spine. "About what?" I asked. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "About us. About this thing between us." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been dreading. I forced a smile. "And what is it that we have, John?" He looked at me with a hopeful expression. "I think we have something special." I felt a pang of guilt. John was falling into my trap just as I had planned, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. Still, I had to keep up the act, had to keep playing the game. So I smiled at John, a fake smile plastered on my face. "Yes, John," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We do have something special." And just like that, the trap was set. The game was on, but at what cost? The Cold War at home with Larry was as icy as ever. We'd occasionally run into each other, exchange chilly greetings, and then retreat to our separate corners. Most nights he stayed at his apartment, claiming it was more convenient for his work. One Friday afternoon, I called John. I laced my voice with warmth, as fake as his documents, inviting him over to my place. He probably thought I was finally ready to give in to his advances. Poor guy, he couldn't have been more wrong. When John stepped into my home, he was greeted not by a seductive housewife, but by my old classmate, now a stern-faced police officer. The surprise on John's face was worth every bit of it. The officer checked John's papers, and as expected, they were as fake as a $5 bill. Now it was my turn to make a move. I offered John a choice. He could either stick with Larry and face the consequences of his fake documents or switch sides and work for me. John's eyes darted between me and the officer, and after a moment of silence, he nodded. He agreed to my deal. Checkmate, Larry. With that, the real game began. I had Larry's pawn now playing on my side, but I knew this was just the beginning. Larry was a crafty man. He wouldn't go down without a fight. In the days that followed, I kept a close watch on John. Despite his agreement, I knew I couldn't fully trust him. He was a wild card, a potential threat. But for the time being, he was a useful one. One day, I called John to my office. "We need to talk," I said, my tone serious. He looked at me with a hint of unease in his eyes. "About what?" he asked. "About Larry," I replied. "I need to know everything. His plans, his strategies, everything." John hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." I had my insider and my counterattack was ready. But this was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. Larry wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had to be prepared. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was war. And in war, there are no rules, only survival. Days turned into weeks, and I was getting anxious. I wanted to confront Larry, to show him I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. Tyler, who I turned to again, gave me some advice. "Push Larry," he suggested. "Make him think you've fallen into his trap." It was a gamble, but I was ready to play the game. So John and I staged a photo shoot. We posed in ways that could be seen as compromising, like proof of an affair, but we were careful. We kept the original photos where everything was as innocent as a Friday school picnic. Once the photos were ready, I handed them to John. "Give these to Larry," I said, passing him the envelope. "Let him draw his own conclusions." John looked at me, concern on his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once you start this, there's no going back." "I know," I replied, my voice firm. "And I'm ready." The very next day, Larry was all smiles at dinner. He thought he had caught me, that he had the upper hand, but he didn't say a word about it. I wasn't worried. I knew it was coming and I was ready. Meanwhile, Tyler was on the case, digging up dirt on Larry and finding all the evidence we needed. He was good at his job, and I trusted him. Finally, Tyler called me. "Larry's relaxed and has let his guard down," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "I've caught him. I've got all the proof. Photos, videos, everything." I felt a surge of excitement. "Good," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's bring him down." But I didn't confront Larry, not yet. I wanted him to think he was winning. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he'd been played. So I waited, playing the part of the dutiful wife, biding my time until Larry made his move. I knew it was coming, and I was ready. The clock was ticking towards the family dinner. I knew this was the showdown. Strangely, I felt calm. I was ready. The dinner was at Larry's parents' luxury mansion, a huge estate that screamed old money. Larry was there, of course, playing the role of the perfect son and husband. But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. We were halfway through the main course when Larry cleared his throat and stood up, a smug smile on his face. "I have something to say," he announced, looking straight at me. He pulled out a set of photos of me with John and tossed them on the table like he was holding a winning hand. "Proof," he said, his voice full of triumph, "of my wife's infidelity." The room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. I was ready for this. I calmly stood up and met Larry's gaze. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I know this man, but he's not my lover. He's an actor hired by you, Larry, to frame me." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The room filled with John's voice confessing everything. Larry's smile faded, and his eyes widened in shock. But I wasn't done. I pulled out my own set of photos and videos, evidence of Larry's affairs, and tossed them on the table. "What about these, Larry?" I asked, my voice cold. "Can you explain them?" Larry stammered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. His parents' faces turned to stone. My parents, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "You ungrateful brat," my father roared at Larry. "We trusted you with our daughter, and this is how you repay us." Larry's mother was in tears. "How could you, Larry?" she sobbed. "How could you do this to us?" to her. The aftermath was swift. We divorced. Larry's parents, furious at their son's deceit, fired him from their company. His reputation was in ruins. As for me, I walked away with $7 million in compensation. Now Larry is jobless, scrambling to piece his life back together, while I'm free. I'm enjoying the peace and quiet, the freedom from him. I won. I took on Larry and won. I outsmarted him and played his own game better than he did. And it feels good. It feels right. Our 5-year-old daughter stated, "Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking to be let out," while we were out on a peaceful family drive. My heart skipped a beat when her sweet voice broke the stillness. I looked at my spouse, attempting to gauge his response. His expression paled from when it had been composed moments before. I wasn't sure if he was feigning ignorance or if her statements really scared him. His eyes wild with terror, he cast a quick glimpse through the rearview mirror back at our daughter. He said something along the lines of, "That's a scary thing to say," attempting to ignore it. "You shouldn't tell such lies." From the passenger seat, I glared at him, my chest clenching with mistrust. "Perhaps we ought to stop at the rest area," I said, sounding more caustic than I meant to. 6 years had passed since our marriage. My spouse has always had my support, despite the demanding nature of his work. While he concentrated on his profession, I had been the one keeping everything under control at home. But now that our daughter had said such unusual things, I was filled with a sense of unease. Was the dark side going to come to light? I am Elizabeth. At 30 years old, I tied the knot with James. We've been together for 5 years, and our bond has always appeared strong. Our daughter Julia was born the year after we were married, and she filled our lives with endless happiness. She just turned 5 years old and has been growing up healthy and active. Our family had been enjoying busy, joyful days full of laughter and love. In an attempt to lighten the mood, James said, "How about going to the zoo next Friday?" "Congrats, I am eager to view the giraffes." Juliet gasped with delight, as if she had forgotten her earlier remark. I felt some of the tension melt away as I smiled at their light-hearted banter. James was a loving and caring husband from the beginning. He has been kind and considerate ever since we first started dating, and that continued when Julia was born and we were married. He would excitedly participate in family get-togethers on his days off, playing games and making Julia laugh. He was our devoted and unwavering father. I would often reflect on how fortunate I was to have married him. The sight of James and Julia together filled me with immense joy. We had a happy, secure, and loving life. But little did I know, those peaceful days were about to be shattered. One day, James came home with a heavy sigh, his face looking weary and troubled. "You're being transferred to a different department?" I asked, noticing his downcast expression. "Yeah," he replied, his voice flat. "It's company policy. They want me to gain experience in different places." His words felt like the first crack in our happy life. I didn't know why, but something about this transfer made me uneasy. I could sense that there was more to the story, something James wasn't telling me. And as our daughter's strange words echoed in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. James was being transferred to the busiest department in his company, which meant he might not be able to spend as much time with us. The news hit our family hard, especially Julia. "Daddy, are you not going to play with me anymore?" she asked, her big eyes filled with worry. James, trying his best to reassure her, gently stroked her hair and said, "I'll do my best to spend as much time with you as possible. Julia, let's go to the zoo again sometime soon." Despite his comforting words, I could see the regret in his expression. He knew this transfer was going to change things for us, and the thought of it weighed heavily on his mind. As I watched him with our daughter, a tightness grew in my chest, overwhelmed with emotions. The transfer didn't involve a change in salary or require us to move, but it was still a big deal for our family. Just the thought of having less time together made me feel incredibly lonely. However, I knew the one feeling the most vulnerable was James. Adjusting to a new, more demanding environment would be tough for him. "Please don't push yourself too hard," I said, trying to hide the worry in my voice. I knew James had a tendency to throw himself fully into his work, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. That's why I worried about him overdoing it. Unfortunately, my concerns turned out to be justified. At first, James managed to balance his work and home life. He still made time for family activities and found moments to rest despite his busier schedule. But about a month after the transfer, everything changed. His time at home decreased dramatically. He started working overtime, often coming home late at night, long after Julia had gone to bed. It became more common for him to go out for drinks with clients, and he even began working on his days off. But there was something else that concerned me even more. One day, I cautiously asked him, "Hey, can you take a day off next Friday? Julia misses you, and you've been working too hard lately." James looked at me with a tired, frustrated expression. "Who do you think I'm working so hard for? Should I just turn down client meetings and risk getting fired? He snapped. I quickly replied, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just worried about you. That's none of your business, he muttered, brushing me off. Anyway, make sure you have money ready for next week's drinking party. His words stung, and I could see how much the stress was affecting him. James, who had always been kind and patient, was now irritable and short-tempered. He started taking out his frustrations on me more frequently, and I found myself walking on eggshells around him. What worried me even more was how he was spending money extravagantly, claiming it was necessary for entertaining clients. This new habit was beginning to impact our living expenses, adding financial stress to an already tough situation. Because I knew how kind he used to be, I was more worried than angry about his current behavior. It was clear to me that the pressure of his new job was getting to him, and I feared he was going to collapse from overwork if things didn't change. I felt helpless, not knowing how to make things better for him or for our family. As the months passed, James's situation only worsened. 5 months after his transfer, he reached a point where he was coming home mostly just to sleep. Our conversations became brief, and the connection we once had felt distant. Julia, feeling the absence of her father, started to show signs of sadness. She often wore a forlorn expression, missing the time they used to spend together. Seeing her like that broke my heart. I knew we couldn't go on like this. I needed to find a way to help James before his relentless work schedule took an even bigger toll on our family. But I didn't know where to start, and the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. I knew things couldn't go on like this, so I started trying to figure out a way for James to take a break. He was clearly overwhelmed, and our family was suffering because of it. But just as I was beginning to make plans, more bad things started to happen, almost as if the universe was working against us. The worst blow came when my mother, who had been battling an illness for several years, suddenly passed away in the hospital. The moment I heard the news, it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "No, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. My father had died when I was young, so my mother was the only parent I had left. Losing her felt like losing the last piece of my childhood. I couldn't even have a proper conversation with her before she passed away, and that regret weighed heavily on me. When the call came, I was at home, and I was so shocked that I couldn't move for a while. I just stood there, frozen, as the realization hit me that she was really gone. But what hurt even more was James's reaction when I told him about my mother's passing. His response was unbelievably cold. "Hey, do I have to go to that funeral too?" he asked, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. I stared at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. Yes, the relationship between James and my mother might have been distant, but she was still his mother-in-law. She was family. I couldn't understand how he could be so indifferent, especially at a time like this. "What are you saying?" "Of course, you have to go," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a family funeral. Don't get mad at me." He muttered, rolling his eyes. "Oh, why does this have to happen now?" I had plans too. His words cut through me like a knife. In the past, James would have comforted me, perhaps by rubbing my back and grieving with me together. But now, as he sighed in dissatisfaction, he seemed like a completely different person from the one I had promised to spend my life with. Naturally, he didn't help with any of the preparations for my mother's funeral. I arranged everything alone, feeling more isolated than ever. On the day of the service, James remained silent and sullen. He didn't offer any support or comfort, and after the funeral ended, he simply said, "It's over now, right?" I'm heading home first, and left without helping with the cleanup. I was initially confused by his reaction, but by then, I had lost the energy to be angry. I was simply bewildered and deeply disappointed in him. No matter how busy or stressed he was from work, his behavior at the funeral was unacceptable. When did my husband become such a cold person? Despite feeling frustrated with him, I finished cleaning up with Julia by my side. She was too young to understand everything that was happening, but she could sense that something was wrong and did her best to help me. "Mom, Julia will help you," she said, her small voice bringing a bit of comfort to my aching heart. After the funeral, I decided to stop by my parents' house for a short while. It wasn't far from our home, and I wanted to say a final goodbye to the place that held so many memories of my mother. Although it was a sad visit, I felt it was something I needed to do for my own peace of mind. When I arrived at my parents' house with a heavy heart, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The house felt empty, a shell of what it used to be. As I stood in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of my mother's life, I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. But before I could even begin to process my feelings, something unexpected happened. "Mom, wait a moment," Julia suddenly shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "Huh? Julia, what's wrong?" I asked, startled by her sudden change in behavior. As soon as we arrived at my parents' house, Julia's expression had shifted dramatically. Without another word, she dashed straight into the back room, leaving me standing there, puzzled and concerned. I quickly followed her, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and confusion, wondering what could have caused her to react like this. I had taken Julia to visit my mother's place several times before, but I had never seen her act like this. Curious and concerned, I hurried to follow her as she moved with a sense of purpose. Julia stopped in front of the dresser, her small hands reaching for the second drawer from the bottom. It was as if something was drawing her to it. "Mom, Grandma wants you to have this," she said, holding up an old hand mirror. The sight of the mirror took my breath away. It was an item that had always been precious to my mother. She cherished it so much that she rarely used it, and I didn't even know where she kept it. I stood there stunned as I realized that Julia had somehow found this hidden treasure. "How did you know it was here? And what do you mean Grandma wanted me to have it?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. "When Grandma was sleeping earlier, she told me that you were sad and asked me to give this to you." Julia answered innocently, her eyes wide with sincerity. I couldn't hide my surprise. Her words sent a chill down my spine. There was no way Julia could have known about the existence of this hand mirror, let alone where it was kept. Yet here she was, holding it out to me with a calm certainty that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Wanting to understand what was happening, I decided to ask her some questions. I asked about things she couldn't possibly know, tomorrow's dinner menu, what I was thinking about, and even thoughts I had during the funeral. To my astonishment, Julia answered each question correctly, as if she had read my mind. It became clear to me that my daughter had a mysterious ability to know what people were thinking. I was both amazed and bewildered. "Wow, that's amazing. Julia, you know everything," I said, stroking her head gently, still trying to wrap my mind around this revelation. I had always thought that the idea of mysterious abilities was just something from stories, never imagining that my own daughter might possess such a power. Julia, proud of her newfound ability, put her hand on her hip and gave me a confident look. "That's right. Julia knows about Dad, too." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. What she told me next was incredibly unbelievable and unforgivable. Julia revealed things about James that shook me to my core. I listened in stunned silence as she spoke, realizing that the man I had married was not who I thought he was. A few weeks after my mother's funeral, I decided it was time to confront James. On a morning when he was getting ready to leave for work, I casually mentioned, "By the way, I'm visiting my friend with Julia next Friday." James, who had been focused on getting out the door, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He frowned, looking genuinely troubled. "Really? Oh no, I'm off that day." "That's too bad," he said, his voice filled with artificial concern. I could sense the insincerity in his tone. It was clear to me now that he was hiding something. I let out a small knowing smile, careful not to reveal my true feelings. Now that I knew the truth, there was no love left for James inside me. That Friday, I left home with Julia as planned. We spent about an hour away, giving me time to gather my thoughts and prepare for what I needed to do. When we returned home, Julia pointed towards the garage and said, "Dad's over there." I took a deep breath and walked towards the garage, where the shutter was still down. My heart was pounding, but I knew what had to be done. I lightly knocked on the shutter and called out, "James, I know you're in there. Open it." There was a moment of silence. Then a hesitant voice replied, Elizabeth. "I thought you and Julia had plans." "It's canceled," I replied calmly. "If you're going somewhere, we want to come with you." He sounded flustered and hesitant, clearly not expecting this. "Oh, okay," he stammered, reluctant to open the garage shutter. I had a pretty good idea of what was going on inside, but decided to stay quiet and observe. "Julia wants to go for a drive too," I added, hearing the hope in her voice. Unable to resist, James had no choice but to agree. A few minutes later, he reluctantly opened the garage, and we started our drive together. Sitting in the passenger seat, I looked at James as he drove. His profile was tense, and it solidified my final decision. Life with James had been enjoyable and happy, but I knew those days would never come back. "Hey, did you know Julia has a special power?" I finally brought it up as we merged onto the highway. James furrowed his brows, confused by my sudden confession. "Huh? What's that supposed to mean?" "That's a silly joke." He laughed dismissively. "Daddy, the girl in the trunk is asking you to let her out." Julia suddenly raised her voice from the back seat. I watched as James's face turned pale. He glanced at our daughter through the rearview mirror with a frightened expression. What a scary thing to say. "You shouldn't tell such lies," he said nervously. "But it's true," Julia insisted. "Then should we pull over at the rest area?" I suggested, trying to support Julia's claim. James immediately looked at me, startled. We don't need to do that." "It's just a kid's joke," he said, trying to brush it off. "Julia has a mysterious power, you know. Besides, it's hot today, and it could be dangerous if someone's really in there," I added. He must have thought my suggestion made sense. After flinching and stiffening, he reluctantly headed towards the rest area with a contorted expression on his face. Upon arrival, we left Julia in the air-conditioned car and went outside to check the trunk. "I don't think there's anything in there." "Come on, quickly," I urged James, who was hesitating. Realizing he couldn't escape anymore, James nervously opened the trunk, breaking into a cold sweat. In the next moment, a young woman jumped out, her face flushed red from the heat. "I knew you were cheating," I shouted, my suspicions confirmed. The young woman, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable, stood there while James shook his head. "No, it's not like that. She is a colleague from work. We were just working together," he stammered, trying to explain. "Wow, working in the trunk of our car," I retorted sarcastically. "At the new apartment you're doing a job." James' excuses were pathetic and unbelievable. It turned out that while Julia and I were out, James had been cheating with this woman at home. They were about to go for a drive when we returned unexpectedly, so he had no choice but to hide her in the trunk. As the woman was taken away, James seemed unable to grasp the situation fully. He kept trying to come up with more excuses, but I wasn't listening anymore. I knew our marriage was over. The trust and love we once had were gone, replaced by betrayal and lies. I looked at Julia, who was watching everything quietly from the car. I knew I had to be strong for her, to move on and build a new life without James. I laughed at how ridiculous James' lie was, standing my ground as I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. "What is this?" I asked, showing him the paper. It read, "Let's go on a drive date on Friday." James and the woman, Janice, turned pale when they saw it. It was no surprise. They could see their flirty email exchanges printed right there. Thanks to Julia, I have found out everything on the day of my mother's funeral. At my parents' house, my daughter had told me, "Daddy has been spending a lot of time with Janice lately. I'm sad because Janice is taking Daddy away from me." After witnessing Julia's strange ability to know things, I became suspicious and decided to keep an eye on James. Sure enough, I found undeniable proof of his affair on his phone. I had made up the fake plan to catch him in the act. "It's a shame this drive turned out this way," I said sarcastically. "It's unfair to look through my phone without permission," James protested, his body tense as he reacted to my words. His absurd remark made me burst into laughter. I had thought he was just busy with work, but it turned out he was spending time with Janice, using our money for their dates. Who exactly is being unfair here? I shot back. "By the way, I've been recording everything since we got into the car." Remembering all the wrongs James had done, I pulled out my phone from my pocket. I had secretly pressed the record button to capture everything. The evidence I had wasn't just messages in this video. I also set up hidden cameras in our house and garage. "Janice, I know everything about you too," I said. Under my relentless confrontation, they both turned white as sheets. I was furious with James, but I couldn't forgive Janice either. I had thoroughly investigated my husband and figured out who she was. Janice was a 27-year-old new employee who worked with James in his new department. From the messages, it was clear she knew about me, yet she still went ahead with the affair, making her just as guilty. Sorry, Elizabeth," James whimpered, clearly not expecting to be cornered so perfectly. His pitiful attempt to plead with me only filled me with more disgust. I glared at both of them with all the anger I could muster. "I will forgive either of you. Get ready to pay," I said firmly. Hearing my words and perhaps realizing their fate, both of them collapsed to their knees. After that, I divorced James. The fact that I had recorded everything and gathered all the evidence paid off. They were ordered to pay $500,000 in compensation. I was also able to get $1,000 a month in child support from my husband. But their trouble didn't stop there. I heard that news of their affair spread throughout the whole company, especially since they worked in the same department. This made things very uncomfortable for them, and eventually they broke up. Their coworkers started to disapprove of them, and in the end, they had no choice but to resign. Now I've heard they're struggling with the burden of the compensation payments and are left with nothing. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying peaceful days with Julia. I'm focused on giving her lots of love and support, knowing she has a special gift. I want to make sure she grows up happy and well taken care of. At the age of 10, my life took a difficult turn. My name is Emily. Although my dad had been ill for some time, I didn't fully comprehend his condition until he passed away. He was there one day, and the next there was nothing except an empty place at the dinner table. My mother filled that vacant area really quickly. Jack was taken home by her 2 months later. She must have felt alone and needed someone quickly. Like he owned the home, Jack moved in and made it obvious he didn't want me around. "This is Jack, Emily." Mom introduced us the day he moved in, saying, "This is my daughter, Emily, Jack." Jack gave me a chilly expression, as if he'd rather be somewhere else. I managed to say, feeling awkward but trying to be nice, "Hello." Jack did not even smile. He simply nodded. He looked up at Mom. "Linda, may we discuss the living situation?" His hand on her shoulder as they walked away, I recall feeling a cold. I didn't have to wait long to begin feeling alienated in my own house. Jack was always nagging me and making rules for everything, like don't leave your stuff in the living room. Consume food more quickly. Avoid creating excessive noise. It didn't stop. Mom seemed exhausted or empty-eyed, but she simply followed Jack's instructions. Things boiled over at dinner one evening. A glass of water spilt towards Jack after I unintentionally knocked it over. Silly child, is there nothing you can do correctly? As the water splattered over his trousers, Jack lost it and leaped to his feet. I apologize, Jack. It was an accident. I stumbled as my face began to burn. Sorry doesn't fix problems. Emily, please use greater caution, he admonished, speaking louder than was necessary. Mom said nothing as she sat there silently, wiping her lips with a serviette. I turned to face her, thinking she would say anything to defend me, but she said nothing. In their room, I heard them fighting. Jack had a rough, high-pitched voice. "Linda, you need to get that youngster in shape. Just because you're used to turmoil doesn't mean I have to live that way." Mom's response was hushed, but I could understand some of it. "Please, Jack, she's just a kid. She hasn't adjusted yet." Moderating, "It has been months. I am warning you if things don't get better." Not that I needed to hear the rest. The message was clear. Mom wasn't resisting Jack's request for me to move out of the way too much. The next few months were just as hard. Jack's complaints were a daily thing, and Mom's silence grew heavier. I was walking on eggshells, trying not to make a sound, trying to disappear if I could. But you can't disappear in your own home, can you? Even a 10-year-old knows that much. Life at home got more complicated when Mom told us she was expecting. Jack already had a hard time tolerating me, and the news didn't exactly make him happy. He was silent for a long minute before he spoke, and when he did, his words were cold. "Well, that's just great. Linda, just what we needed," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Mom smiled, but it was a weak smile. "It's a blessing, Jack. You'll see. A fresh start for us." I felt a mix of excitement and dread. A little brother or sister seemed like a dream, someone new to connect with. But with Jack's mood swings, I wasn't so sure. The months flew by, and the baby finally arrived. It was a girl, and they named her Lauren. I was thrilled. She was so tiny. And when I first saw her all wrapped up in her pink blanket, my heart melted. I thought having Lauren around might make things better, even make Jack soften up a bit. Holding Lauren felt magical. She was so small, her tiny fingers grasping at nothing. "Hey there, Lauren. I'm your big sister, Emily. I'm going to take good care of you," I whispered, promising silently to be there for her no matter what. But the magic didn't last. Bringing Lauren home changed things again. Jack became fussier than ever, especially about money. One night, about a week after Lauren came home, I overheard him talking to Mom in the kitchen. His voice was harsh, louder than it needed to be. "More expenses, Linda, diapers, formula, who knows what else. And what about Emily? She's not even mine, and I'm paying for her too." Mom's voice was a quiet murmur. "Jack, please, she's just a child. We can manage. Things will settle down." It's not just about managing Linda. It's about priorities. We need to think about our family now, our real family. I knew what that meant. I wasn't real family. The sting of those words hit me hard. I slid down the wall by my door, hugging my knees, trying not to cry. The final straw came when Jack sat us down in the living room one evening. His face was serious, and he avoided looking at me. "Linda, we need to think about the future. Emily's getting older, and expenses are piling up. Maybe it's time she went to live with her Aunt Joyce." It felt like a punch in the gut, being sent away just like that. Mom finally spoke, looking at me with sad eyes. "Emily, honey, it might not be so bad. Aunt Joyce has a nice house, and you'll be well taken care of." "But Mom, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you and Lauren." The room went silent. Jack's next words were cold and final. "It's decided then. I'll call Joyce in the morning." Moving in with Aunt Joyce was like stepping into a different world. Her house was big, clean, and always silent, too silent for comfort. The first day I arrived, she laid down her rules like we were negotiating a peace treaty after a long war. "You'll follow my rules under my roof, Emily. No nonsense, no mess, no back talk," she declared as she led me through the hall to what would be my room. The room was plain, with bare walls and a single bed in the corner. It felt nothing like home. I nodded, too tired and upset to argue. Homework right after school, chores before dinner, and lights out by 8. I won't tolerate any laziness or sloppiness, you hear? Aunt Joyce continued, her voice firm. "Yes, Aunt Joyce," I whispered. "Speak up when you're spoken to." "Let's have no mumbling here," she snapped. I quickly corrected my tone. "Yes, Aunt Joyce, I understand." The days that followed blended into each other, each as strict and unforgiving as the last. Aunt Joyce was tough, tougher than anyone I'd ever known. She had a way of making simple conversations feel like interrogations. Homework was a battlefield, too. If I got a B instead of an A, Aunt Joyce had sharp words for me. "You can do better than this." "Your laziness won't fly here," she'd scold, even though I'd spent hours poring over books. The worst part was how she reminded me of my mom's decision to send me away. If I dared to talk back or ask for less criticism, she'd retort sharply. "No wonder your mom sent you here. You need discipline. You obviously weren't getting it." Those words hurt. They always did. They made me feel unwanted, unloved, like I didn't belong anywhere. I was just another problem Mom solved by sending me away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I learned to keep my head down, do what I was told, and only speak when necessary. Aunt Joyce had no patience for tears or complaints, and I didn't have the energy left to fight. "It's for your own good," she'd often say after scolding me harshly, as if her sharp words were supposed to make me into someone better. I wasn't sure who that better person was supposed to be. All I knew was that I was getting really good at being alone, at being quiet, and at not being a problem. Because in Aunt Joyce's house, not being a problem was the best thing you could be. Living with Aunt Joyce was suffocating, and I found myself missing my mom more each day, even though I knew she'd let me go without much of a fight. One afternoon, the feeling of missing her got too strong to ignore. Aunt Joyce was out, probably at her bridge club, and I knew I had at least a couple of hours before she'd be back. Her phone was always left on the kitchen counter, charging next to the fruit bowl. It seemed like my only link back to my old life. I hesitated for a minute before I picked it up, dialing my mom's number. It was like muscle memory. I hadn't forgotten it, and maybe I never would. My heart raced as I heard the phone ring once, twice. Then I heard her voice. "Hello, Mom, it's me, Emily." There was a pause, a breath, maybe. Then, "Emily, why are you calling?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Another pause, longer this time. Then she spoke, cold and hard. "You shouldn't have called." "But, Mom." "Emily, listen to me. You need to stop this. I can't have you calling me." "But why?" "I miss you, Mom. I miss home. When can I come back?" Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was discussing the weather. "You can't. That's done. Don't call here anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, please, just don't." "Emily, there's nothing here for you. Goodbye." She hung up and the line went dead. The silence in the kitchen was overwhelming. I felt my hands shake as I put the phone back on the charger. The finality in her voice broke something in me. She didn't want me. She really didn't want me anymore. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled to my room. I closed the door softly, not wanting to make any noise that might hint at my rebellion. I sat on the floor, my back against my bed, and let myself cry. The room felt smaller than ever, like a box slowly closing in on me. I heard the front door open and close, and Aunt Joyce's voice called out, "Emily, you better have finished your chores." "Yes, Aunt Joyce," I called back quickly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I didn't want her to see any signs of weakness. Weakness wasn't allowed here. I went to the kitchen to help with dinner, acting like nothing had happened, but inside I felt different, emptier, more alone. Mom's final words kept playing over and over in my head. That night, Aunt Joyce found the call log on her phone. Her face twisted into a scowl as she stormed into my room, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the quiet. "So you took my phone to call your mother. Thought you'd go behind my back." I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. I just wanted to hear her voice. Aunt Joyce laughed, a harsh grating sound. "And what did that get you, huh? She doesn't want you, Emily. Even you can't deny it now." Her words were like ice, and I felt them chill me to the bone. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and painful. "No more phone. No more pity parties. You're here because she doesn't want you. Remember that." The punishment was severe, more chores, stricter rules, and the cold shoulder from Aunt Joyce, who made sure I felt just how unwanted I was every day after that. Aunt Joyce's house had become a prison, each day dragging on heavier than the last. It was clear I was nothing but a burden to her, a nuisance she put up with only because she had to. But even that thin thread of obligation snapped one chilly morning, a year into my stay. "You're packing your bags today, Emily," Aunt Joyce announced over breakfast, her voice stern and final. I stared at her, my spoon halfway in my mouth. "What? Why?" "Your mother stopped sending money." "No money, no reason to keep you here," she replied bluntly, sipping her coffee as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "So what happens to me now?" She shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture. "Not my problem. You can go live with your grandmother. If she won't take you, then it's the orphanage." The thought of going to an orphanage terrified me, but the mention of Grandma sparked a tiny flicker of hope. I hadn't seen her since I was little, barely remembered her, but surely she wouldn't turn me away. Packing my bags felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. I was packing up my life at Aunt Joyce's, each item a reminder of the year. I'd lost Aunt Joy. She drove me to Grandma's house, and the car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. When we arrived, the house was smaller and cozier than Aunt Joyce's big, imposing place. Grandma was waiting at the door, her expression unreadable. "This is Emily, your granddaughter," Aunt Joy said, not bothering with any pleasantries. "I can't keep her anymore." Linda stopped, paying Grandma no more attention. Grandma looked me over, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I see. Come in, Emily." Aunt Joyce didn't stay long. With a brief nod, she left, her duty to me discarded as easily as she had gotten rid of me. Inside Grandma's house was warm and filled with a scent of cinnamon and something sweet baking. It felt welcoming, a stark contrast to Aunt Joyce's cold, sterile environment. "You'll be staying in the guest room, I suppose. We'll need to sort out some more permanent arrangements," Grandma said as she led me down the hall. The guest room was small, with a window overlooking the garden. It felt safe, a feeling I hadn't associated with a place in a long time. "Thank you, Grandma," I said quietly, still unsure of my welcome. She nodded. "We're family, Emily. You belong here more than anywhere else." Over the next few weeks, I adjusted to life with Grandma. It was different. She was strict, but there was a kindness to her rules and a gentleness in her reprimands. "You need to do your chores, Emily. Everyone contributes here," she would remind me, but her tone was patient, not harsh. "Yes, Grandma," I would respond, grateful for her fair approach. Living with Grandma, I began to heal. I found comfort in the quiet routine of our days, the peaceful nights, and the steady rhythm of life that was so different from the chaos with Aunt Joy. The months passed, and on my 19th birthday, Grandma made a decision that would change everything. Over breakfast, she slid an envelope across the table to me. "Take a look at this, Emily," she said, her voice carrying a mix of seriousness and warmth. I opened the envelope and pulled out some official-looking papers. "What's this?" "It's adoption papers, Emily. I want to adopt you, make things official so no one can ever make you feel unwanted again," she explained, watching me closely for my reaction. I felt a lump in my throat. "Really, Grandma? You mean it?" "Yes, I do. You're not just staying here, Emily. You're my family, and it's time we made that clear to everyone else, too." 2 weeks later, it was done. We went to court, and I officially became Emily Bennett, with a new sense of belonging that I had longed for since Mom sent me away. With Grandma's support, I finally felt like I was home. I began looking forward to the future, and Grandma encouraged me to focus on my studies, especially science, which had always fascinated me. "You've got a sharp mind for it, Emily. You could go into medicine. How would you like that?" she suggested one day as we were going over some of my school projects. "I love that, Grandma. I want to help people," I replied, the idea starting to take root. "That it's settled. We'll get you into a good college program. I'll support you every step of the way," she declared with determination. True to her word, Grandma was there for me throughout my high school years. She tutored me in math and science using her old-school methods that were strict but effective. "You need to understand the basics, Emily. You can't skip the foundation," she'd insist whenever I struggled with complex problems. I graduated with top marks thanks to her unwavering support. Grandma then helped me navigate the daunting college application process. When I got accepted into a medical college with a partial scholarship, she was as proud as if she'd received the acceptance herself. "We'll manage the finances, don't you worry about that," Grandma said when I fretted over the costs. "You focus on your studies and become the best doctor you can be." Medical school was tough but fulfilling. I was drawn to oncology, the branch of medicine that deals with cancer. It was hard both emotionally and intellectually, but it felt right, like I was exactly where I needed to be. I completed my degree, then my internship, and finally my residency, each step a milestone that Grandma celebrated. "You're making a real difference, Emily. I'm so proud of you," she'd say, her eyes shiny with pride. By the time I turned 35, I was fully established in my career as an oncologist. My life was busy but fulfilling, filled with long hours at the hospital and the satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference. Through it all, Grandma was my anchor, always there to listen and offer advice on tough days. But life, as it often does, threw another curveball my way. Grandma's health, which had been declining, took a sudden turn for the worse. It was swift and unexpected, the kind of decline that leaves you scrambling to catch your breath. I remember coming home one evening, tired after a particularly tough day at the hospital. Grandma was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking out the window. Her voice was weaker when she called me over. "Emily, come sit with me for a bit," she said, patting the chair next to her. I sat down and took her hand in mine. It felt fragile, like it could break with too much pressure. "I'm not going to beat around the bush," she started, her tone serious. "The doctors say there's not much time left. We need to talk about practical things." A lump formed in my throat, and my eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, please." She squeezed my hand, her grip still strong. "No tears now, Emily. We've got things to sort out. You need to be ready." The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's visits, late nights, and legal paperwork. Grandma wanted to make sure everything was in order for me, that there would be no complications with her estate or her wishes. When the end came, it was peaceful. Grandma passed away in her sleep at home, just as she had wanted. The emptiness left by her passing was overwhelming, and the silence in the house felt too heavy to bear at times. Planning the funeral was hard. I went through her address book, calling relatives and friends. The responses were polite, some even warm, but it became clear that not many would make the effort to come. My heart ached not just for the loss of Grandma, but for the loneliness of this farewell. The funeral day was quiet, the chapel more empty than full. I stood there, feeling oddly detached as the priest spoke about life, loss, and legacy. It didn't take long after the funeral for the past I thought I had left behind to come knocking at my door. My mother, stepfather, and their daughter, who was now 21 years old, showed up unexpectedly. My mother didn't waste any time. "Emily, you need to share the inheritance your grandmother left you," she demanded, her tone entitled. I stared at them, disbelief mixing with anger. "You left me, remember? 21 years ago, you decided I was too much of a burden." My mother's face twisted into a sneer. "Ungrateful girl. Now you're a rich doctor with an inheritance. You owe us." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Grandma adopted me legally. You owe nothing to me now." The shock on her face was almost comical. My stepfather, ever the bully, leaned in. "You're going to regret this, Emily." As they left, I slammed the door behind them, the click of the lock sounding unusually satisfying. Standing there, my back against the door, I felt a mix of relief and renewed determination. A few days after their visit, I was at work when I got a call from a neighbor. "Emily, it looks like your family's at your house again. They've been bringing in furniture. It looks like they're moving in or something." When I pulled into the driveway, seeing their car parked out front made my stomach turn. I walked in to find my mother, stepfather, and stepsister unpacking boxes in the living room, acting like they owned the place. "What are you doing?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother turned around, feigning surprise. "Oh, Emily, we're just settling in. After all, this is family property." "No, it's not. This is my house, legally left to me by Grandma. You need to leave now." My stepfather stepped forward with a smirk on his face. "Make us. We're family, and we deserve a part of this house." I could feel the anger rising inside me. "You haven't been family for over 21 years. You can't just come here and claim what's mine." My stepsister, who had been watching from the side, finally spoke up. "Come on, Emily, don't be so heartless. We're just asking for what's fair." "Fair?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. What's fair about abandoning a child? What's fair about only showing up when you think there's money to be had? They had no answers, just scowls and muttered curses. I'm calling the police, I declared, pulling out my phone. My mother tried to stop me. You'll regret this, Emily. I've regretted knowing you for years. This is nothing new. I shot back as I dialed 533. The police arrived quickly. I explained the situation, showing them the legal documents proving my ownership of the house and Grandma's will. The officers were firm. You need to leave, one of them told my mother and stepfather. This property doesn't belong to you, and if you don't comply, you'll be removed forcibly. My stepfather glared at me, his anger clear, but there was nothing he could do. This isn't over, Emily, he threatened as they gathered their things. Oh, but it is, I replied, my tone cold and final. After they were gone, I walked through the house, Grandma's house. Each room was filled with memories, each corner a testament to her love and the life she had built here. A life she had fought to pass on to me. Standing in her favorite spot by the window, I made a promise, not just to her but to myself. I would not let the bitterness of the past tarnish my future. I had fought hard to become who I was, and I would continue to fight to honor her legacy and the sacrifices she had made for me.